name's adcv. I'm a contributor in the strategic finance core unit for MakerDAO and also part of Steakhouse Financial. And with me, we have Kevin from BlockTower and Sebastien from MakerDAO also. And we're going to have a small fireside chat about the state of real-world assets, and mostly from the perspective of MakerDAO, which has been a pioneer in developing this space. So maybe just to open, we'll start with introductions from the two panelists, and then we'll go into just a sort of fireside discussion. And if there are any questions in the audience, we can leave it to the last sort of 5-10 minutes to talk about those. So, Sebastien, what's your story?
Yeah, thank you very much. So my story, I joined the MakerDAO 2.5 years ago, really organically from the forum, just chatting with people, disagreeing. And someone at some point said, well, maybe you should do something. So I started to do some things. And I joined on a project that was core to MakerDAO for years, but there was having some challenges, mainly legal challenges, because there was a Maker Foundation back in the days, and there was some issues because I was doing real world asset. What we call a real world asset is just investing in the real world, well, the world actually. And there was some legal issues, so I started to work on it with Centrifuge, Success, and others. And it was a 3-week project, more or less. And 2 years and a half after, we are still in the same spot. It turns out that investing in the real world when you don't exist because you are a decentralized organization is a bit tricky. There are a lot of problems, but we managed to find most of the solutions. So we started to do the first investment, I think was in March 2021. And today, I think we have close to $500 million invested in real world assets. If we use, we have mainly what I call private credit, which are mainly centrifuge pools. We can go in detail later. And we also have a big chunk, one big chunk, which is we are participating in loans from a regulated bank in the US, Huntington Valley Bank. And the last part is really investing in a short-term bonds ETF, lending to the US government. Because the US government is always as a deficit, so we can lend it and make a profit. And going forward, we are looking now to see if we can pass this yield to the holders. So that will be kind of a full cycle, but we are not there yet, but we are moving quite quickly those days, I would say.
Amazing. And thanks, Kevin. What's your story?
Yeah, for sure. Kevin, I represent BlockTower. So at BlockTower, we take a fairly unique approach in terms of investing across the theme of real-world assets and DeFi lending in general. We generally start on our VC side with investing in across up and down the technology stack of bringing real-world assets on chain. So investing in partners like Centrifuge. We're also big supporters of the Maker ecosystem as well. We're also unafraid, and the differentiated approach is beyond just general venture investing. We're also unafraid of taking an active approach in terms of providing liquidity into various on-chain and DeFi-related lending and borrowing protocols. And with our recent BlockTower Credit Fund, also really advancing the discussion on bringing real-world assets on-chain by helping to establish the partnerships with Maker and et cetera to bridge the gap, both from a technology, legal, operations, and compliance perspective of bringing quality products to the DeFi world. So really excited for this conversation.
And then why don't we start with sort of taking a step back, and when we think about sort of the origin of this entire industry with sort of the white paper, the original Bitcoin white paper, it sort of has an anti-government bent. Now MakerDAO is lending to the US government. What's the point? Why are we so focused on real-world assets?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And obviously there is a lot of discussion in the space. Should we use anything that is centralized and not censorship resistant? And you can be on both sides of the table because there are pros and cons. It's always a trade-off. So there are some projects like Rai or Liquidity, even if Liquidity has an oracle, so maybe just try, which are really going to the censorship resistance, issuing a kind of stable coin that is, well, no one can stop it. And it works well. Even at MakerDAO, at the beginning, 2 years ago, we had only backing by ETH, which was the best collateral you can have on Ethereum. But then you have a problem is that it doesn't scale. For instance, during DeFi summer, DAI wasn't $1, it was 1.0 up to 1.06, I think. And the only reason is people wanted to have DAI, but no one wanted to borrow DAI to create those DAIs. Because when you, at this time, when you wanted to create new DAIs, someone should have to take a loan and kind of speculating on with leverage on ETH, which is not very sustainable. It is until there is a bear market. So scale is quite difficult. And even if we use the whole Ethereum market cap to create stablecoins, we would have what, let's say, half a trillion, or maybe less even today. It's not that way that we create an economy. And usually we don't sleep on Ethereum, we sleep in a house. We need a mortgage for this house. We need a full economy. We need payments between to buy swag or whatever. So it's good to have a casino that is decentralized and censorship resistant, but it might not be enough, and we might have to deal with the real world. And I mean, we are in a conference which shows that the real world still has some values. We are not all living all day in the metaverse.
That's a really good point. And then in this environment, what role do you see Block Tower playing, and what value does Block Tower bring to the decentralized protocol? Are you risking centralizing MakerDAO further, or is there something that you can do to help decentralize the backing collateral?
Yeah. So, in terms of the climate, dive in specifically on the parallelization of what's happening in kind of DeFi and real world, right? We are fully appreciative of the world's all the innovation and education that has occurred in like the history of financial innovation in the world's economy, and a lot of that has produced what we know as the financial system today. And as we bootstrap sort of these efforts of introducing a better monetary and financial system on DeFi rails, we want to leverage as much as possible in parallel the current rails that exist in the current financial system to be able to bootstrap our efforts. And so a big part of our role is taking the best pieces of what we can in the current financial system to bootstrap the on-chain economy, the on-chain reality, while also learning and bringing as much as we can. We talk a lot about at Block Tower in terms of not dealing in monoliths, but dealing in kind of like a composable modular thesis. And so in a very similar vein, it's not going to be a big bang tomorrow. We have CBDCs or any type of like more of the what we see in the financial reality in the real world on chain tomorrow, right? It's going to be a modular future, and we play an active role in identifying what's that next Lego building block to add to the maker puzzle, the DeFi puzzle, etc. And as we shift over, so just going to the question of like the risks of centralization, right? I think you'll see that in the trade-offs that we have to make today, centralization may be a trade-off that we're willing to make to start to onboard those pieces as quickly as possible towards a more decentralized future. It's not constant, everything's always changing and dynamic, and we recognize that, and we're pushing towards a better future for all in that regard.
And when we talk about sort of real world lending, when you're fully on chain, it's clear probably to many people how that works mechanically, but maybe it might be helpful if you walk through what it looks like for someone in the real world to borrow from MakerDAO, as it were.
So there is obviously a lot of demand to borrow at Maker. One reason would be that, we have a lot of idle capital, so that is earning nothing, 0%. So even if we can lend it at 1%, for us, it's a win. But it's quite challenging to start the process with a DAO, because a DAO is obviously a quite complicated organization, so it takes a long time. There's a lot of initial cost, because the DAO is not a legal entity, so it cannot sign any piece of paper, but usually we have some some orphan entities that represent MakerDAO in the real world, and those are quite costly to make. There is a lot of legal work involved, sadly. I thought that code was low, but seems like we still need lawyers, and they are sometimes more expensive than smart contract developers. And they write a lot of pages, which is less nice than Solidity to read, but that's life. So yes, there are these legal challenges. Then you have to deal with DAO and trying to figure out how you can get your proposal approved. So yeah, it's quite complicated. And now that MakerDAO is quite big and that we are, I would say, in the second stage of real-world asset, at the beginning, we were willing to do experiments, small vaults, let's say 5 to 10 million, with some startups because it was more entrepreneurial at this time. Obviously, now we want to focus more to invest at least 100 million. So that's start to be a good chunk of money with counterparties that have quite some reputation. For instance, a Block Tower. That's why Block Tower came to MakerDAO. We are also dealing with Société Générale, a regulated bank. I already talked about HVB, Bank Signum. So those are kind of based as well on a bit of trust. We are not lending to FTX because that would not be a great idea. And so we have half a billion at Gemini in GUSD. So yeah, it's really, to answer your question, it's quite complicated. It's not as easy as, well, MakerDAO, I guess most people understand the concept of MakerDAO. You put the collateral, you take the loan, 2 minutes, it's done. That's the decentralized part, and it works super well. The real-world asset part is, well, you start the process. After 1 year and spending 1 million to legal fees and plenty of risk assessment, you might get something. So the process is not very good yet. But we see with time, let's say at some point we have tokenized RMBS, asset-backed securities, on-chain, then you will be able to put those tokens on MakerDAO, get a loan against it, and it will be composable, permissionless. I hope so, that it will be permissionless. But I think the biggest challenge we have to face is to be sure that all those real-world assets will be permissionless and only on a whitelist. So yeah, that's the future. So we are still in the process of getting there, and a lot of work is needed.
Yeah, I would just add, we see a lot of technology players that introduce the capabilities into the space, into like real world persons on lending or providing collateral and lending on DeFi rails, and there is a general lack of appreciation of the legal modularization that also needs to occur in parallel with these technology platforms, right? It's definitely not a menu right now. I think it's more just a list of ingredients that that person needs to figure out how to put all the pieces together into creating this token or creating this collateral that will be accepted by the MakerDAO, community governance, etc. But as we kind of create those dishes, I keep going on this food. I guess I'm hungry. But as we create those, like sort of menu items, as we start to bring structured credit, as we start to bring much of what we're trying to do with Maker on chain, we start to see patterns in what we do and be able to adopt kind of legal patterns, optimize legal flows, operational flows that people are comfortable with, and it's all kind of built on top of one another in that scenario.
So there's like an element of increasing modularity over time that hopefully can get to a point where tokenized real-world assets can slot into MakerDAO permissionlessly. Likewise, I also hope. Could you describe to the audience what your interactions have been like now that you're sort of in the MakerDAO orbit, as opposed to previously in your traditional finance career, maybe?
Unfiltered.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the easiest things to point to is the public nature of our discourse, right? We introduced ourselves in a public community where we didn't even know if anyone was listening, but obviously people were, and voices emerged that we began to basically amplify and be able to latch on to a stronger narrative. Okay, so here's what we can do in this space, right? It's a little bit tough to navigate, honestly, right? You would really need a lot of need and impetus right now to like break that activation, like break the energy that's required to get to even the proposal stage, right? But I think that education is really important because you really need to understand where the community is coming from. You need to be engaged in that public discourse. It's not like a bank where you're not aware of all the other dealings of the bank, right? You're dealing with a community that has many different opinions, but has a history and a direction and future that they're going. So I would almost say that that energy is required. It's not something that should be skipped. But we see that like time and time again where we're also active in the community, and we try to engage in discussions with other potential borrowers who honestly just are looking to extract liquidity, extract capital out of the system without getting that next level of understanding and community discourse. So that like community discourse piece is by far like the most prevalent. It definitely delays things. I would say 3x like longer, but A, that time frame is shortening, and B, I would argue that the upfront discussions make for better outcomes in the long run. We don't want to wait for things to blow up and then for facts and information to surface. We want to have those conversations up front, which is a lot of what we do. When we talk about building smart contracts, right? It's about agreeing upon the rule sets and the parameters up front, so that we don't have to change much in the future, if anything at all, ideally. And that mindset is a little bit flipped, right? We're working through it. We've engaged, we've chatted on the forums. You can find us. We're just Block Tower, or Human Capital, or various members. You can reach us directly through there, which is also not the case in the kind of traditional finance landscape. You generally don't really know who you're talking to, and it could be, he could be like, it's just a complete web of opacity, and that's a completely different paradigm when working with a DAO.
So you don't have an anon profile on the forums?
Nope.
Okay.
Actually, I need to change my name. My name right now is the Block Data Guy, which is arguably, I was really into on-chain analytics at the time. So you can find me. I'm the Block Data Guy on the Maker forums.
And maybe to close out the questions before we go into the audience, when MakerDAO is moving towards real-world assets, what's in it for DAI holders?
So I would say 2 or 3 things. The first one is to have stability. As I said a few years ago, DAI wasn't $1 because, the system couldn't sustain a big DAI demand. With real-world asset, if we include the stablecoin USDC, GUSD, and USDP, now the DAI will never be above $1, more or less. If everything is working correctly, it will never be again above $1. And second point is some yield or some rewards. Obviously, if we are making interest revenues on one side, we could give some to the DAI holders so they benefit from the work we are doing on the other side. And I think it's really about a trade-off. Maker is really working for DAI holders, so we need to be sure that we have one of the best products in the market. And I think, that's mainly those points. And now I would add another one. Having a huge pile of capital provided by DAI holders is also a great way to try to change a bit the world. I know that at MakerDAO we have the Clean Money initiative where we try to say, maybe if you could invest, let's say 1 billion, 2 billion, maybe way more in the future, into trying to make a sustainable development, to fight against climate change, stuff like that. That could be something for good, for a change at least. So not only pure finance, but trying to bring the good to the world as well and fight for some ideas. That I think is important as well.
That's a great point. And I see that we have like 5 minutes left, so I think it'd be nice if there's people in the audience that have any questions to either of the panelists. I think now is a good time to.
Just a two-sided question, a pretty quick one. The first one, at some point, I know DAI is going to be collateralized by like real estate assets. Hopefully, that's true, right? when that happens, these markets might not be that liquid. How does Maker ensure that the collateral exists and the value does not disappear from these assets, whether that they burn down the house or something?
So we will not just invest in one house, it will be a pool of mortgages. So even if one house is burning, it's not the end of the world. It will not impact. That's why when we go to the real world and on all the block tower deals there with that, there is always someone else providing what we call junior capital. So the first loss is taken by someone else, and we only invest in the senior tranche, which is the most secured. Which is a lowest yield as well, but I mean, it's always a trade-off. So that's one part of the answer. So we try to be safe on those fronts, and we have a surplus buffer to cover if, in any case, we still take a loss to cover that part. And on the other side is that there is some kind of, not really, but you can imagine that there is some part of maturity transformation, because die holders might think that they could redeem at $1 every time. Actually, if you read the white paper, you can only redeem for $1 at emergency shutdown, something that I think will never happen, or I hope so. But we are always providing $1 exchange, or try to provide, because it's a useful tool to have a stablecoin that is always worth $1. And for that, so that means that we will not be able to invest. Let's say we have 6 billion DAI currently. We will never be able to invest 6 billion in mortgages, because those are long maturities. It takes a long time to get the money back. So it will be maybe 10% on those kind of assets. And at least above 50% will be on short-term treasuries or crypto-backed loans, stuff that we can unwind quickly should die holders decide to leave the system and go to USDC or USDT.
Yeah, just like building on top of that point, we again don't want to discount the financial innovation that is securitization that has occurred to help, pool assets, and reduce idiosyncratic risks such as the house burning down as much as possible. So in looking, for example, in the future of Maker potentially having like a pool of like mortgage-backed securities, like having that be collateral that backs DAI, you're benefiting from kind of the large numbers, the narrow waist efficiencies that securitization brings to just financial products in general. So yeah, just echoing that, those products currently exist today, and they're in highly liquid markets, right? And we're starting from the most reasonable stack of the asset chain to bring to Maker the best assets that meet the liquidity needs, but also yield and kind of security perfection, et cetera, et cetera. So.
Hi, over here. So I have a question around just, I guess, DeFi safety and TradFi adoption. I was having a chat with somebody who was an advisor to the World Economic Foundation, a forum, sorry, and we were discussing how in the next 10 years, the euro, well, they basically know that it's going to fall. I think it's almost, as a meme or not as a meme, it's almost like a consensus that the euro is going to fall. I was just wondering, and he was basically saying that the idea that usually, I guess, governments and the people who are working towards just integrating DeFi, especially in the World Economic Forum, they are taking a look at the things that we're doing. But the thing that they are mostly concerned about is safety and just security. I guess the hacks are the thing that they mostly are worried about. So my question is, I was wondering if there's any other things that you guys think that TradFi are looking at to see what is the biggest impediment to just wide adoption. Yeah. Apart from safety, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, the biggest one, and I think we've heard this to a broken record, but your regulatory, like unclarity, right? We spent a lot of hours with law firms in discussing the transactions that we're engaging in. Basically, it would help a lot to have even the opinions and the clarity from a regulatory perspective of what is the denomination of the assets that we're doing. It's also difficult because in evaluating the transaction and comparing with like traditional finance transactions, it's hard to mirror the two without a clear understanding of a categorization of the common language, basically, across the two systems.
Thank you.
Hi, guys. So I'm one of those pain in the ass lawyers, and I'm begging, I'm pleading, I'll get down on my hands and knees if you guys do not fuck with the 40 Act. So when you're dealing with securities and you put something that is one asset class into another asset class, and then you do that multiple times, you create something called a mutual fund. And we do not want to do that here, especially with real estate, given nobody understands the real estate market. It's still propped up by bullshit credit rating agencies that, quite frankly, don't give a flying fuck about anybody here. Thank you. We didn't plan that. And so I think that there is a way to do this. I know there's a way for us to figure out how to stay in the DeFi realm outside of regulation. Granted, we still do need some regulation. FTX has proven that. And so has Luna and all the other craziness of this year. But I'm like I said, I'm begging and pleading for us to find a smarter, better way to be better than the TradFi fucks, right? And then actually build the world that we're trying to all be here for, right? So just when we're dealing with real estate, please take that in mind. I want real estate. I want to be able to be in my boxers and buy a flat in London or hang out in Hong Kong or whatever. But if we can't actually back that up with real world data, as a data guy, you understand that if the shit goes in bad, it comes out bad. All right? So that's my only I don't know, that's not a question, that's just a cry.
We hear you.
So for the 40 Act, we can just remove the US, and that solves the problem.
I wish that was the answer, but we are the cancer.
No, but yeah, there is plenty of problems. I'm not challenging that at all. We're trying to best the best solutions, but it's always a trade-off. You need to give something. I mean, if there was a possibility to, for instance, create a stablecoin only backed by ETH by doing unlimited rehypothecation, which couldn't work, but at least I didn't find one, I would do it. But currently, my main concern is I don't want to have DeFi where everyone needs to KYC and the only tokens that represent real-world assets are whitelisted. That, I think, the worst case that could happen, because then, well, what's the point? But it's still a war and it will not be easy.
I'm actually just kind of curious for the MakerDAO guy. When you guys are making this decision of how to set up your investments, how many people come from the TradFi world? How many of you have experience in TradFi?
I think it was half of the team of real-world finance and now strategic finance. And we hope that in the community as well, people with experience will chime in and say, well, no, that's not good, or, well, that's fine, we can do it. So we try to crowdsource as well. We have some internal experts doing some risk assessment, for instance, and some lawyers. And we try to crowdsource as well. So it's really good that if anyone has a financial background, to come on the forum and say, well, no, this is not good, and I will explain you why.
To stress here, nobody in MakerDAO is taking unilateral decisions about how to do any of these allocations. There's just proposals, thoughts, conversations, improvements, and constituents from around the community with a diverse range of experiences chime in, and ultimately Maker token holders make the final decision on whether to move forward with one asset allocation or another. But yeah, I think this is one of the nice things of working in a DAO, is that you don't have to wait to find one or two people with the right profile or education or background or pedigree or whatever. These are sort of common sense conversations that people with a diverse range of experiences can have in a public setting. And although it takes longer and it's more chaotic and fiery and spicy and memey, it does end up in outcomes that are hopefully, specific for MakerDAO, the protocol, and helpful also for the ecosystem at large.
Hey guys. DAI is the biggest decentralized stablecoin. So how are you dealing with the coming regulation for stablecoins and maybe your direct competitor, CBDSC?
So for stablecoins, there is no clear regulation for the DeFi ones. Maybe in the US, but I'm more in the Europe because there is less issues in the Europe in general. So the MiCA regulation exclude DeFi stablecoins, so that's a good win because I would have no idea how to comply with the regulation otherwise. There are also plenty of recommendation from the BIS and other central banks, which all lead to the fact that in the hierarchy of stablecoin, DAI will be on the bottom for them because they think it's too risky. And on top, you will have CBDCs, obviously, and tokenized bank deposit, which are perfect because banks are regulated. And as we know, with regulation, nothing bad can happen. And the middle ground will be the stablecoins that are fiat-backed, like USDC or the others. So currently, I don't see a way for us to be above the others or just playing as the same game, just because we don't have any way to comply to regulation. So we will always be, I guess, some kind of outliers with central banks saying, well, those are not good stablecoins, don't use them. But so we will have to deliver a way better product and educate community to show, well, according to regulation, okay, we are not that good, but decentralization of community and so on, you cannot regulate it as easily, but anyone can see on-chain what we are doing. We can see all the discussion on the forum where we agree, where we disagree. So that, I think it's a trade-off, and I think regulation by crowdsourced regulation might work as well. I don't know. I feel quite regulated because everything we are doing, there is always at least 10 people disagreeing. So
you should come into the Discord and hashtag speculation in the channel. Well, the number down there says 0, so I think we're done. Thanks to everyone for your patience, and yeah.
thank you.